By the early spring of 1945, exhaustion had become as constant as the gray sky hanging over devastated Germany. The front was collapsing westward. Cities gave way to smoldering ruins, and in the shifting belt of chaos moved units, offices, and entire auxiliary battalions that had once seemed permanent. Among them were women, signal operators, clerks, nurses, stenographers, and those assigned to anti-aircraft batteries or railway security. They were not captured in battle. The small garrison of a town on the Rhine surrendered after brief negotiations, once it became clear that further resistance held no meaning. The women were assembled on the central square alongside wounded soldiers and the remnants of the local command staff. The wind chased fragments of newspapers across the pavement, mixing the smell of soot with damp brick dust. On the far end of the square, the ruins of a recently bombed warehouse still smoldered. During the final months of the war, many of these women had already experienced what it meant to live under total collapse of supply lines. Soups disappeared from the barracks menu and were replaced with thin, watery broth. Bread was issued in slices so small they barely qualified as rations, each loaf stretched with fillers to increase its volume. For those who had managed to visit home, store shelves had become nothing but bare boards, explained away with vague assurances about a temporary hardship that was supposedly almost over. But time passed, and the plates grew only emptier. Now, standing in the cold square, in their worn uniforms, the women looked detached from the world around them. Disarming proceeded without incident. Allied officers addressed them firmly, but without hostility, informing them that they would be transferred to a prisoner of war camp where established regulations would apply. Words about conventions and standardized treatment sounded formal and distant, yet strangely different from the harsh military language the women had grown accustomed to. They were divided into groups, their names, ages, and duties recorded. Some were listed as telephone operators, others as medical assistants or general support personnel. Their personal histories, private fears, and hopes did not fit into the available forms. As evening fell, the lines began forming near the trucks, waiting to transport them. The truck beds were covered with canvas, but the cold pierced through easily. The women climbed the metal steps cautiously, taking care not to slip. Inside, they had to sit tightly pressed against each other, holding their remaining possessions, small bundles, torn photographs, handkerchiefs, tiny prayer books. Everything else had been left behind in burnt rooms and abandoned apartments. The convoy moved out during the night. Outside the thin canvas walls, the world shifted rapidly. Streets gave way to dark forest roads, then to ruined industrial outskirts, yet inside the truck, only time moved. First, the dim outlines of buildings flickered by. Then, occasional headlights of passing vehicles, and the distant glow of fires still burning somewhere far behind them. The hum of the engine and the creaking boards merged into a dull rhythm. Within hours, hunger became not just discomfort, but a relentless, gnawing emptiness. Their last meager ration had been issued 2 days earlier, hard bread and a sliver of preserved fish. Many had eaten everything immediately, unable to resist. Others tried to divide their share into tiny fragments, but none of it lasted. Their bodies, accustomed to chronic undernourishment, no longer protested sharply. Instead, exhaustion seeped through their limbs like cold water. Some women felt pins and needles in their legs from sitting too long. Others could focus only on the image of food, steaming broth, real coffee, fresh bread. These were no longer memories of the recent past, but visions of a life that felt almost imaginary. Periodically, the convoy stopped. Through gaps in the canvas, the women saw soldiers checking the trucks, unloading fuel canisters, or coordinating with other units. Water was passed around in metal cups filled only halfway. The brief relief faded quickly, replaced once more by the same heavy emptiness. Hot meals were reserved for active combat units and POW transports, especially those carrying non-combatant women, were far down the supply chain. The night was long, the wind grew harsher, and those sitting near the canvas edges trembled from the cold. A quiet system of rotation formed. Women seated in the middle moved outward to give others a chance to warm up. In that cramped darkness, a quiet solidarity began to form, unfamiliar to many after years of rigid military discipline. Just before dawn, the first outlines of a camp appeared. Watchtowers, long stretches of barbed wire, wide gates, searchlights sliced through the misty air. The surrounding noise indicated activity, other convoys arriving, tools clattering on metal, the distant ringing of pots and lids. One particular sound, the metallic clatter of kitchen equipment, stood out instinctively, though none dared to place hope in it. At the gates, the women were lined up again. A pale column of smoke drifted above the camp, rising from kitchen chimneys. Everything here appeared organized. Clear signs, structured routines, officers speaking calmly. Compared to the ruins behind them, the place seemed almost orderly, which only deepened the sense of uncertainty. Registration lasted several hours. Each woman received an identification number, underwent a quick medical inspection, and was assigned to a barrack. Those who looked severely exhausted were promised additional checkups, yet still no food was offered. Wooden bunks, folded blankets, swept floors, these details seemed surreal after nights spent in basements and burned-out buildings. But even the tidiest surroundings could not silence the deep ache inside their stomachs. Their first night in the camp passed without incident, but also without rest. The faintest sound, footsteps on gravel, a distant command, metal containers being moved kept them alert. And then, sometime before dawn, a new sound echoed across the yard. Heavy lids being opened, ladles scraping against the sides of large metal pots. Many of the women recognized this sound instantly, military kitchen equipment in use. Somewhere near the entrance, warm air drifted with a distinct aroma, something hearty and unmistakably real. It seemed impossible after weeks of diluted supplies, and a few women assumed it was their imagination. But soon, they would learn it was not imagination at all. What happened next would become one of the most haunting, yet profoundly human memories of their lives. The second morning in the camp began much like the first, with cold air creeping through the cracks in the barrack walls, with stiff movements, with the faint dizziness that accompanied long-term hunger. The women rose when commanded, forming uneven rows outside. Their uniforms, some patched, some burned at the edges, some simply reduced to threadbare coats, barely protected them from the morning chill. Breath turned to mist as they exhaled, and many shifted from foot to keep warm. No one expected that this morning would be different. At first, it was only a faint trace in the air, a smell. Warm, heavy, unmistakably connected to food, not the thin, smoky odor of improvised wartime kitchens, not the faint scent of burned grain substitutes, but something fuller. It drifted over the yard in uneven waves, carried by the breeze. Some women perceived it immediately, turning their heads slightly. Others noticed only when it became strong enough to override the persistent smell of damp wood and cold metal. It was the scent of cooked vegetables, of broth, of something thick and real. For several seconds, no one reacted visibly. The thought of hot food had become almost foreign, so foreign that the mind hesitated to believe. But the smell intensified. It seemed to wrap around them, settling on their coats and hair, slipping into their lungs with every breath. The realization spread slowly, like a ripple. The kitchen was preparing a real meal. One of the guards passed nearby, carrying large metal containers, their lids clattering lightly. The steam rising from the edges confirmed everything the scent had already revealed. Inside the line, the women stood a little straighter, as if pulled upward by invisible threads. The tension that filled the air before sunrise shifted into something else, something that hovered between hope and disbelief. The routine continued. Lists were checked, numbers called. There was no mention of food yet. The camp personnel behaved as though nothing unusual was happening, and perhaps for them, nothing was. A POW camp was supplied according to formal protocols, and breakfast was part of those protocols. But for the women waiting in the cold, the concept of breakfast had blurred months earlier. For many, It had stopped existing altogether. They were eventually led toward an open yard near the central kitchen building. The group moved slowly, conserving energy. Some held onto each other's sleeves for balance. The closer they came to the building, the stronger and more vivid the aroma became. Now it was clear what was being cooked: a thick soup with root vegetables, likely cabbage and potatoes, with the unmistakable richness that came from real broth. A few women felt their throats tighten simply from breathing it in. Inside the kitchen area, several large field stoves were lined up in a row. Steam escaped in long white columns. Kitchen workers, uniformed Allied personnel, moved methodically among them. Ladles scraped, metal lids lifted, boots clacked on stone. Everything looked orderly, functional, almost peaceful. The women watched this scene with a kind of reverent quiet, as though witnessing something rare and fragile. When the first pot was opened fully, a wave of steam rose into the air. It smelled overwhelmingly of warmth, of nourishment, of something undeniably real. The women closest to the front inhaled sharply, and a few blinked repeatedly, overwhelmed by the sensation. For weeks, they'd eaten only ration fragments, dried bread that tore at the mouth, bitter substitutes, thin liquid that barely resembled soup. Their bodies had adapted to scarcity. But psychologically, the absence of any real meal left an emptiness deeper than physical hunger. Now, confronted by the heavy, rich scent of cooked food, many felt a surge of emotions they could not analyze. Relief, fear of disappointment, disbelief. The women were directed into a line. Each carried either a dented metal cup or a tin bowl given to them during registration. Their hands shook not from cold, though the morning air was sharp, but from a mixture of weakness and anticipation. Standing upright for too long made some lightheaded. A few shifted their weight constantly, trying to maintain balance. Then the distribution began. One by one, they approached the large pot. One by one, ladles filled their bowls. The thick soup splashed softly as it made contact with the metal, leaving streaks of steam rising into their faces. It smelled of cabbage, potatoes, and the kind of broth that came only from real meat or bone, a luxury none of them had encountered for many months. Some women instinctively pulled the bowl closer to their chests as if afraid someone might take it away. Others hesitated, overwhelmed. A few stood motionless, simply staring into the rising steam. And then the crying began. It was not loud, not dramatic, more like a quiet unraveling of tight knots inside their chests. Tears gathered slowly, almost cautiously, then slid down dirty, exhausted faces. Some wept silently, their shoulders trembling. Others pressed lips together, trying to maintain composure but failing when the first spoonful touched their tongues. The hot soup burned slightly, an almost shocking contrast after weeks of cold and stale food. But the warmth, the salt, the softness of the vegetables, the richness of the broth, all of it combined into something overwhelming. The body recognized nourishment before the mind could process it. The relief was immediate, physical, undeniable. Women who had not shed a tear throughout bombings, evacuations, or forced marches now cried over a bowl of soup. It was not just hunger. It was the sudden reminder of humanity, of care, of warmth, of a world where food was not a distant memory, but a reality. For the first time in many weeks, their bodies felt something that resembled safety. The hours that followed the morning meal unfolded with a softness the women had not felt for a long time. The tension in the camp did not disappear entirely. Captivity was still captivity, but something in the atmosphere shifted. The hot food they had received acted not only as nourishment, but as a signal. The conditions here were different from what many had feared. It did not erase exhaustion or erase the memory of chaos, but it introduced a fragile sense of stability. After finishing their soup, the women were instructed to rest in their assigned barracks, while camp personnel prepared for routine registration checks. The walk back was slow. Some moved carefully, as though afraid that too much motion would cause the warmth spreading through their bodies to vanish. Others walked with a faint steadiness that hinted at returning strength, even if only temporary. Inside the barracks, the women settled onto the wooden bunks. The blankets were coarse but clean, and the structure itself, though Spartan, was orderly. Sunlight filtered through small windows, falling in thin stripes across the floorboards. The atmosphere felt almost still. For the first time in days, silence did not come from fear, but from fatigue, mingling with the faint comfort of a full stomach. Some women leaned against the walls, closing their eyes. Others lay down, hands on their abdomen, as if confirming the reality of what they had eaten. A few simply stared ahead, absorbing the quiet. Yet beneath this fragile calm lay an undeniable truth. Their bodies, after weeks of rationing and hunger, were now reacting to real sustenance. Warmth spread through them slowly, unevenly. For some, it brought a wave of relief. For others, it triggered an unexpected heaviness that made their limbs sink. The sensation of fullness was strange, almost unfamiliar. Many had forgotten what it felt like. As the hours passed, the camp activity continued outside. Distant footsteps, periodic commands, the rhythmic sound of boots on gravel. These noises drifted through the barracks like echoes from another world. The women listened without tension. The sounds no longer carried the edge of danger they had grown used to in combat zones. Later that morning, a group of camp personnel entered the barracks to conduct basic health assessments. The process was systematic. They checked for visible injuries, signs of malnutrition, fever, and severe exhaustion. Many women bore the unmistakable signs: sharp collarbones, sunken cheeks, trembling hands. But the medical team worked quickly and efficiently, marking notes on clipboards, separating those who required further care. Some of the women could not stand steadily during the inspection. Their legs weakened under them, forcing them to sit on the bunk edge while the medics examined them. Weeks of inadequate food had left their muscles depleted. Even the hot soup they consumed earlier, though vital, was only the first step toward recovery. Yet the emotional aftermath of that meal remained the most striking. Throughout the barracks, one could see occasional glimmers of tears still clinging to eyelashes, as though the earlier moment of release had not fully ended. Some women brushed them away quietly. Others did not bother letting the remnants of emotion settle naturally. Outside, the kitchens resumed their steady rhythm. Pots clanged, water boiled, tools scraped. For women long accustomed to sirens, explosions, and the roar of aircraft, this steady domestic sound carried a strange comfort. It suggested predictability, routine things they had not known for months. As the day progressed, the women were slowly introduced to the camp structure. Notices were read aloud regarding schedules, work duties, and distribution routines. The information was delivered in a factual, neutral tone, without threats or harshness. The women absorbed the rules with a quiet attentiveness. For many, the mere existence of order without chaos felt like a relief. In the afternoon, they were allowed a brief period outside the barracks to stretch and acclimate. The yard was enclosed, but spacious enough for movement. The ground was firm, the air fresh. Some walked slowly, feeling the weight return to their legs. Others stood motionless, basking in the sunlight with their eyes half closed, taking in the warmth on their faces. The camp was not a place of comfort, but it was a place of structure. And after months of destruction, that structure felt almost foreign. As evening approached, a new aroma drifted from the kitchen. This time, it was lighter bread being warmed, perhaps, or potatoes roasting. The scent traveled quickly, stirring a faint unease within some of the women. The memory of their earlier tears clung to them, creating an unexpected anticipation. Would the evening meal be real as well? Would it be another reminder of the life they had lost? When dinner was finally served, it was simpler than the morning meal, but still substantial. A piece of bread, small but unmistakably fresh, and a ladle of thin stew. The bread alone drew quiet reactions, eyes widening, lips tightening, shoulders relaxing. Some women pressed the bread gently between their fingers, feeling its softness as though confirming it was real. No one cried this time, or at least not visibly, but a deep quiet settled over them as they ate. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of reflection, the silence of people who had been reminded unexpectedly of something long absent. That night, as the women settled into their bunks, the camp around them fell into its routine. Guards took their positions, lights dimmed, the noise subsided. For the first time in many days, sleep came naturally, not easily, not fully, but naturally. Some women lay awake for a while, listening to the faint hum of the camp, feeling the unfamiliar warmth in their stomachs. It was a small comfort in the vast uncertainty ahead, but a comfort nonetheless. And in that fragile moment, for the first time in weeks, hunger was not the defining force of their existence. The third day in the camp began with a clarity that felt unfamiliar. The women woke not from hunger, but from routine. The ache that usually marked their mornings had eased. Their bodies, though still weak, were slowly responding to regular meals. Even the structured rhythm of the camp roll calls, inspections, predictable tasks felt like a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed their final months of freedom. Outside, the morning air was cold. The women lined up for roll call more steadily than the day before. Shadows from the guard towers stretched across the yard as the camp came to life. Again, the mild scent of breakfast drifted through the air. After months of unpredictable rations, the idea of a guaranteed morning meal still felt surreal. Led toward the kitchen, they saw steam rising from metal pots. Breakfast was simple porridge, bread, weak tea, but it carried genuine nourishment. Some women ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. Others guarded their portions out of instinct, still adapting to the idea that food would not be taken away. During the day, the camp followed its routine. Light duties were assigned: cleaning, arranging supplies, maintaining shared areas. These tasks offered direction, grounding the women in something steady after prolonged fear and uncertainty. Medical personnel moved through the barracks, checking for malnutrition and illness. Many were still frail, but the effects of consistent meals were already visible. In the afternoon, the women were allowed outside briefly. Some walked carefully, regaining balance. Others simply stood still, letting sunlight warm their faces. Each small movement reflected change, a loosening of tension, a faint return of strength. Expressions no longer shaped solely by fear. From afar, the scene looked ordinary. But up close, every posture told a story. Someone standing straighter, someone breathing more evenly, someone allowing themselves a moment of calm. The first meal they had received continued to echo in their thoughts, an ordinary bowl of soup that had broken through weeks of numbness. As evening approached, the smell of stew spread across the camp. The women assembled quietly, receiving their portions without the emotional collapse of the first day, but with a deep, steady gratitude. Dinner was eaten in reflective silence, each spoonful reinforcing a fragile sense of normality. That night, the barracks grew still. Some women slept deeply for the first time in weeks, while others lay awake, adjusting to the strange sensation of a full stomach. Hunger had defined their lives for so long that its absence forced them to relearn how to simply rest. Yet, beneath the quiet, one truth remained. Receiving real food had not only eased their physical suffering, it had restored a sense of dignity they thought war had erased. It reminded them that even in captivity, even after weeks of fear and deprivation, humanity could return in small, steady steps. And for women who had lived too long in uncertainty, that reminder became one of the defining memories of their survival.